بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We're going to inshallah get started with hadith number 19 of the collection of 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. And just for a reminder, this is the second to last one we'll be covering before we finish the entire series. So remember, we started like a year and a half ago on number 21, and then we looped all the way back, so now we're at 19. عن عبد الله بن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال كنت خلف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يوما فقال يا غلام إني أعلمك كلمات احفظ الله يحفظك احفظ الله تجده تجاهك إذا سألت فاسأل الله وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله واعلم أن الأمة لو اجتمعت على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك إلا بشيء قد كتب الله لك وإن اجتمعوا على أن يضروك بشيء لم يضروك إلا بشيء قد كتب الله لك قد كتب الله عليك رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف رواه الترمذي وقال حديث حسن صحيح. Now, before translating the hadith to English and going through explaining each part one by one, this hadith is one of those hadith that are like it's so comprehensive. It's one of those advices that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives that are really like comprehensive to the point that if you understand this hadith, you're understanding like a majority of Islam, and you'll be able to go through life in the proper way a Muslim goes through life. And to illustrate this point, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, he says, وَهَذَا الْحَدِيثُ يَتَضَمَّنُ وَصَايَا عَظِيمًا. In this hadith, like it encompasses these huge, important advices, وَقَوَاعِدْ كُلِّيَّةً مِنْ أَهَمْ أُمُورِ الدِّينِ وَأَجَلِّهَا. And like principles to follow from the most important aspects of the deen. حتى قال بعض العلماء, to the point, all the way to this point, that some of the scholars, they said, تدبرت هذا الحديث فأدهشني وكدت أطيش فوا أسف من الجهل بهذا الحديث وقلة التفهم بمعناه. So, like the scholars, they said about this hadith that I did tadabbur, like contemplation of this hadith, and like it's to the point where I was so surprised and I was so like infatuated, and I feel so sorry, and I feel like I feel very bad for a person who completely is ignorant of this hadith and doesn't understand the principles and the pillars we're going to be talking about with this hadith. So this hadith is not it's not like other hadith where Prophet ﷺ is describing a certain context or a specific thing, or giving a ruling on something specific. This hadith is essentially setting up like the view upon life that a Muslim needs to have. And so the hadith narrated on the authority of Abu Abbas, Abdullah ibn Abbas, who said, of Ibn Abbas, who said, one day I was behind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the scholars have difference of opinion on whether this means that he was walking behind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or was he riding on a camel with him. And the stronger opinion is that he was riding on a camel, traveling with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he was sitting behind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, O young man, ya ghulam, I shall teach you some words of advice. Be mindful of Allah and Allah will protect you. Be mindful of Allah and you will find Him in front of you. If you ask, then ask Allah alone. And if you seek help, then seek help from Allah alone. And know that if the nation were to gather together to benefit you with anything, they would not benefit you except with what Allah has already prescribed for you. And if they were to gather together to harm you with anything, they would not harm you except with what Allah has already prescribed against you. The pens have been lifted and the pages have dried. It was related by Tirmidhi, who said it was a good and sound hadith. So the first part, when it says, Ya ghulam, inni u'alimka kalimatin, if we pause right here, like just look at the situation. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is riding on a camel, and behind him is Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, and notice he refers to him as Ya Ghulam. And the scholars say this is Ibn Abbas this time was between 10 to 13 years old, but when we say Ya Ghulam, it's someone who hasn't even hit bulugh yet, someone who hasn't even hit puberty. And this is like Very, very important point, because look at what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is teaching Ibn Abbas, and look at the way he's teaching as well. So the concepts that this hadith is going to cover are deep, deep concepts. And if we compare it to our current day now, these concepts that we're talking about right now, it's not very commonly taught to people, like to our children, to children who haven't even hit the age of puberty. It's seen as this is like a very complicated topic, and especially, and we'll touch on this more later in the explanation, but we look towards certain concepts of aqidah in a very technical, in a way that's very theoretical, without the application in reality. And that's why we overcomplicate some concepts that are supposed to be simple and deep. So, Prophet he says the first thing, احفظ الله يحفظك. Now, احفظ, it comes from the word like حفظ, which can have multiple meanings, from memorizing to like maintaining and protecting, etc. And so he says, احفظ الله يحفظك. So protect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the translation it says, be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or preserve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يحفظك, and He will preserve you, He will maintain you, He will quote unquote memorize you. So what does this mean? It means to maintain the huquq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to do that which is fard, to do your best in doing that which is sunnah, or which is mandub. And this we saw in an earlier hadith Qudsi, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, ما تقرب إلي عبدي بشيء أفضل من أداء ما افترضت عليه. That my servant does not come closer to me with anything better than that which I have made a fard, an obligation towards him. وما يزال يتقرب عبدي إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه. And he does not continue, coming closer to me with the nawafil, with the supererogatory acts, until I love him. So the perspective of احفظ الله يحفظك, it's maintaining the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's doing that which is obligatory, trying to do as much as you can of that which is recommended, trying to avoid that which is not recommended, that which is makruh, and trying your absolute best also to avoid that which is haram. So this maintaining your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a way for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's saying, احفظ الله يحفظك. When you maintain this relationship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will maintain you. And when we say maintain you, there's two ways that the commentary Ibn Hanbali explains. That one is in like your dunya matters, meaning like your body, your family, your rizq, etc. So when you maintain this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you maintain your ibadah, when you do that which is an obligation, it makes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, maintains you, your physical self. And then he mentions the second one, which he mentions is the more important one, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala maintains your deen. And I think we mentioned this last week or 2 weeks before, but we went over a story essentially illustrating the concept that you being, if you see yourself as someone who's a practicing Muslim, someone who does the obligations, and avoid that which is haram, etc., that this steadfastness on the deen is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the hearts are between His two fingers, and He flips them however He wishes subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we maintain this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala maintains our steadfastness on the deen. And then He says, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. So, again, maintain or protect, be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, تجده تجاهك, and you will find Him in front of you. So you will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be there for you, for these different things that you mentioned. إذا سألت فاسأل الله وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله. Now here there's like some important details we have to discuss, right? So first of all it says, and if you were to ask, and look, this is the direct translation, if you were to ask, then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you were to seek help, then seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So notice there's no exception where in the hadith the Prophet mentioned that, if you were asking, about these certain things that are to do with the akhirah and etc., then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's said in a general form. وَإِذَا أَسْأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ. If you were to ask anything of anyone, you should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what's important to understand here is that this is an emphasis of the importance of asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala And whether that be through dua, or whether that be through, when you face certain situations, you instantly think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you turn to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. And this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, مَنْ لَمْ يَسْأَلِ اللَّهِ يَغْضَبْ عَلَيْهِ, that whoever doesn't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will become angry with him. And notice that this reduction, or this small amount of making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or someone who doesn't make dua often, who doesn't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gets angry at him. Now, what does this mean in terms of practical things, right? Like, for example, we can all think of an example, like if you were to ask someone for a water bottle, okay, there's a water over here, can you come grab this real quick? Can you grab that for me? Now, does this fall under the meaning of the hadith where it says that when you ask, you should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yes, and with some details, right? So the hadith is saying that when you ask anyone of anything, you should turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first, and even in these smaller things, these dunya things, where the people are capable of helping you, whether it was the example I gave before, of asking for a water bottle and someone hands it to you, it's not that this is haram, and it's not that this is, a makruh act, but what's better here is for you to go and grab that water bottle yourself, and to ask the people as little as you can. So the emphasis given here is to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much as you can in every single situation. And of course, in those situations where only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of doing something, then this is an obligation only to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, I can't ask, make intercession through someone and ask him to make dua for me to grant me 1, 2, 3. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to grant, these different things. So therefore, I can only ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, in these other things, where the people can benefit you, here it's better not to ask the people. And this was like a common practice amongst the Sahaba, and even to the point that when they were riding on their camel or their donkey or their horse, and they dropped something, again, to grab it, you have to get off your horse and then grab it and then sit back up. They would do that instead of asking someone, "Hey, can you grab that for me?" And we see this in the hadith also of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "Izhad fi dunya yuhibbaka Allah," that have zuhud, have this asceticism in English, or minimalism, you can translate it that way, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love you. So have this zuhud in the dunya, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love you. وَازْهَدْ فِيمَا عِنْدَ النَّاسِ يُحِبَّكَ النَّاسِ, and this is the key part. And have zuhud towards what the people have, and then the people will love you. So if we contemplate about this and also look at the context of this hadith, what we're seeing is that, and this is like a observable fact amongst human beings, is that when you ask people something, for example, you ask him once, if the person's a very nice person, he'll be like, "Yeah, of course," etc., and he'll give it to you, or he'll help you out, right? But then imagine you ask him again, and you ask him for help again, and then again, and again. People will get annoyed. People will they'll make you feel bad for it, right? And again, this is something that's true generally amongst human beings in general. That if someone does you a favor, they're always going to remind you of that favor, and that's something that is observable, right? So the hadith of the Prophet is saying that if you have zuhud towards the people, then the people will love you, because you're not a burden on them. You're not always asking them for something. You're not always in need of something. You take care of yourself, and that makes the people love you. And that's why in the context of this hadith, when it says, he said to fas'alillah, that again, like we talked about, in the things that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can grant, then you must ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whoever does not ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does not make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gets angry at them. But in these things also of the dunya matters, then you should try the best you can to reduce how much you rely on people for the things that you mentioned. And then وَيَسْتَعَنْتَ فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ, and this is also very, very important, and this can go on for a long time explaining this concept, but isti'ana is like seeking help. And the hadith again emphasizes that when you seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And there's again a lot of applications that we can go into for this, but just basic things, right? When we look at the situation of the ummah, right? The situation of the ummah is something that we should turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us with, and of course look into the Quran and Sunnah and look for what are we required to do, right? Versus someone turning to people who he sees in this worldly life have capability or have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed them with power or gave them, etc. I will turn to him for help and say, oh, he can give me a temporary benefit, or he can maybe make the situation a little bit better. So, the Prophet ﷺ, and again, we mentioned in the beginning that this is a child who hasn't even hit bulugh, he hasn't even hit puberty yet. And he's teaching him these concepts that if you were to ask anyone, instantly first, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then if you're going to seek help from anyone, if you're in a situation where you need help, where you're being harmed, etc., and we'll see, the hadith will go into more detail to make sure that this is ironclad, understood completely. When you seek help, only seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this concept, if we ingrain it in our minds and in our children, in our families, we'll see like this closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and like we said in the beginning, maintaining that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will maintain you in this dunya and also in your deen. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْأُمَّةَ لَوْ اجْتَمَعَتْ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَنْفَعُوكَ بِشَيْءٍ لَمْ يَنْفَعُوكَ إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ فَكَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكَ. And know that if, it says here the ummah, but it means, the rest of the creation, meaning in the entire world, if they were to gather to benefit you with something, whether it doesn't matter how small it is, to benefit you with something, then know that they cannot benefit you with anything at all. Doesn't matter how small it is, except that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for you. So again, these concepts that we're discussing right now, from one perspective, it's very basic. It's something that we all learned. It's something that we all know. That of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's qada and qadr, there's the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already written down what we're going to get in terms of benefit and harm. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who only has control of this. But the depth here is applying this concept in our entire life. And remembering this concept, more importantly, in our entire life. And that's why there's a lot of beautiful ayat in the Quran that talk about, for example, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مِّن قَبْلِ أَن نَّبْرَأَهَا إِنَّ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ يَسِيرٌ لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا عَلَى مَا فَاتَكُمْ وَلَا تَفْرَحُوا بِمَا أَتَاكُمْ. The surah continues on, but to summarize the meaning, I mentions that no musibah, which is like a tribulation or a hardship, etc., hits you, in this earth or to yourself, except it's in a book before it even happens. And that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is yasir, is very easy. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions why, and this is the most important part. لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا عَلَى مَا فَاتَكُمْ وَلَا تَفْرَحُوا بِمَا أَتَاكُمْ. So that you don't have this like regret, or you don't feel bad, or you feel that what's happened to you is like the end of the world. And then وَلَا تَفْرَحُوا بِمَا أَتَاكُمْ. And that also you don't feel this. The direct translation is this happiness because of that which came to you. And of course, the happiness here that's condemning is happiness attached to the fact that I got what I got because of how good I am, or because of how knowledgeable I am, I was able to get this degree, or because because I'm so good at this, I received 1, 2, 3. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is this idea of qada and qadr, and again, like I mentioned in the beginning, we'll touch also on how we take the aqidah from a very theoretical perspective without losing its application, really. This idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already written and pre-recorded everything that will happen, that should instantly change a person. Instantly. Your complete outlook on life should change. That when you understand that no one can benefit you with a single thing, imagine. Like if you just practically, imagine if you were explaining this to a non-Muslim. You had a non-Muslim in front of you, you were trying to tell him that in Islam we believe that even if every single person on earth gathered together to give me the most basic thing, to get me a cup of water, that they can't do that. And they're incapable of doing that. And there's no way for them to do it unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already written it and allowed for it to happen. It's a mind-boggling concept that a non-Muslim would not be able to understand. And he would not be able to believe. But that's a belief that Muslims are required to carry. So look at the difference. And the reason is to change your complete outlook on this dunya. That the focus of this dunya is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. The focus of me receiving benefits in this dunya is so that I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing people to give me this benefit. So that connection always needs to be there. وَيَجْتَمُوا عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَضُرُّوكَ بِشَيْءٍ لَمْ يَضُرُّوكَ إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ قَدْ كَتَبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ. And the same thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hadith mentions that Rasulullah says that even if they come together to harm you with something, no matter how small, and the entire people in the world, they won't be able to harm you except with that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already written for you. And then it says, and this is the end of the hadith, رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامُ وَجَفَّتِ الصُّحُفُ, that the pens have been lifted and the paper has dried. And like again, this is like an analogy or a metaphor saying that al-lawh mahfuz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already written every single thing in there that's going to happen, and this ink has dried on the paper now, meaning that there's no changing for the qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is nothing that will cause Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to change it. Okay? And again, now to get into the point I wanted to mention about how we take the aqidah from a theoretical perspective. And it's unfortunate, of course, in current days, when we look at a hadith like this, or when we talk about these concepts, right, of qada wa qadr, rarely is the focus of the conversation actually changing the personality of the person in front of you, or actually taking the aqidah from a perspective of changing your actions completely. So, to illustrate this point, like there's a lot of different conversations that can be had about this hadith, and that are very expansive. Like for example, people can get into the problem of evil. That how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create evil in this world, even though He is the most merciful, right? And these are valid questions for someone who has a problem with that. He doesn't understand this. It's a very valid question. It needs to be answered, right? But if we look at other things also to do with this hadith, like people will, for example, get into how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be the most knowledgeable and we have free will, right? If you look at this hadith, رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامُ وَجَفَّتِ الصُّحُفُ, that the pens have been lifted and the paper, the ink has dried on the paper. So doesn't that mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decreed what I'm going to do, so I don't have free will? So again, the emphasis here, these questions are valid for those who have this shubha in their mind, that they're trying to understand this, right? But more oftentimes than not, we look at these ahadith in this way, and also the ayat in the Quran, I mentioned this, in this way where it's like a theoretical exercise. That, okay, now I need to go and sit down and look from a philosophical perspective how I can combine between these two things of the attribute of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the attribute of a human being having free will or being able to do evil, etc., etc. Whereas these ahadith and these ayat are, first of all, something that we have to have iman in, of course, number one. Number two, these are concepts that are beyond the capability of a human being to completely understand. Like again, if we go back to the example I mentioned about explaining to the non-Muslim that scenario, even if we were to think about it from a rational perspective, there's absolutely no basis for that. If someone told you that every single person on earth, if they came to kill you, it's not possible for them to kill you. Unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written it down for you. Rationally, unless you prove that the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unless you prove that the Quran says 1, 2, 3, unless you prove the Hadith says 1, 2, 3, if you don't have that back end, it's not believable. So these concepts are a place of iman, and they're a place of changing the personality of the Muslim. And to give like a very practical example of this, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, when he used to fight in battles, he used to just rush in. Like he used to, like the Sahaba used to say that, slow down Ali, like let us at least, fight with you, like watch your back, etc. Like he's going in by himself, charging in as if he's his own cavalry. He's being surrounded by the enemy. And he used to fight like that. And when he was asked, right, like why are you just rushing in like this? Why aren't you fighting more carefully? Why aren't you at least bringing people to watch your back for you, etc.? He says, "Nahnu qawmun tahmina ajaluna." Look how deep the statement is. We are a people who, what shields us or what guards us is our lifespan, our ajal. Meaning, the time of your death is guaranteed and already written down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is kitab al-mu'ajjala, it's been written down specifically, and there's nothing that will push it back or bring it forward. So look at the depth of the statement. Ali bin Abi Talib is, and this is the biggest show, or the biggest symbol of having iman in al-qada wal-qadr, in understanding this hadith here. That the Prophet again is teaching to Ya Ghulam, to Ibn Abbas at a time when he's a kid. It's this idea that your lifespan is already written for you, and nothing can bring it forward or back. Even if you rush into an enemy who are completely, they have all their weapons, etc., etc., all this is going on, a situation where no one would sit there and say that, oh, you're surrounded by 200, 300, 400, the entire earth, and they're all coming to harm you, and there's no way for them to harm you. It's something that it's mind-boggling to understand. But this is an idea that completely changed the Sahaba once they understood it. And that's what gave Abdullah bin Mas'ud the strength to go and read the Quran, to read Surah Al-Rahman in front of the Quraysh, at a time when he was the weak one. He didn't have a tribe to protect him. And the Sahaba, of course, they told him that, Ibn Mas'ud, you don't have a tribe to protect you. Who's going to protect you when these people come in and attack you and they start beating you? And Ibn Mas'ud, because of his attachment to the akhirah and understanding of these concepts, that an-naf'u wal-dur biyadillah, al-ajr biyadillah, that benefit and harm is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and your lifespan, your time of death is written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because of that aqidah, he's able to see in front of him the opportunity for ajr. So him going and reading the Quran from the Quraysh, knowing he's going to be beaten up, right? He sees the opportunity for ajr. He doesn't see the door of death, because he knows that his time of death is written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, that's just like a couple small examples of how studying these ahadith and discussing these ahadith and these concepts of benefit and harm from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when you ask, you should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you seek help, you seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When this increasing and making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's supposed to create this radical change within people that completely changes their personality from someone who only sees the tightness and the constrictedness of this dunya to the expansiveness of the dunya and the akhirah. And with that, we can pause right here and take questions.